Hello and welcome to People Making Money. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about business and professional matters, as building your career as well as building wealth. And today we're having our monthly economic echoes. So there's so much information that comes out about the economy, but it's all done on a national basis. And none of us, we all, of course, live in the country, but none of us experiences life as if we lived in the entire country. We live in our specific location. And so, how prices change, how employment trends work, differ from location to location, county to county, state to state. And so we need to dig down into the data in order to understand why our life seems to be going in the way that it's going, especially if it's different than what other people say they're experiencing or what we're being told we should be experiencing. I guess is the sort of simple way to put it. So I'm going to go through a number of statistics so that you can see how this may affect you. You can, and all of these links, by the way, will be in the show notes after the show posts on YouTube. And so you can take, really, you don't need to spend more than about 15 or 20 minutes going through for your own location to see what's going on. Now, I live in Los Angeles, California. I'm laughing because I was in a meeting this morning and there were two of us from Southern California, one from kind of my hometown, Santa Barbara, and then me. And then the rest were from Texas and one was from Atlanta. And they were saying rather, unkind things about our state. But, it is what it is. Unfortunately, the business climate here isn't as good as it is in other states. So, but I use my location as an example. But what you want to do obviously is look at your own. Okay, so let's go ahead and start. I always start with what's called the Consumer Price Index. Going to bring this up. Okay, so here you go. And you can see that the consumer price, this is a consumer price index for the entire country. And you've probably heard this in the news. The consumer price index for July was 2.9%. Okay. Consumer price index for food, 2.2%. For energy, 1.1%. And so thus for all other items, okay, it was 3.2%. So right away, you can see that, if, for example, you live in a place where you don't have a lot of energy consumption, so the fact that the cost of energy went up so little relative to other expenses, would mean that you might be experiencing higher inflation than other people. So let's drill down into some of these. Let's look at food. Okay. So food at home only went up by 1.1%, but food away from home went up over 4%. So if you eat out at restaurants or you order takeout, all of those outside of home type food. So you can see, again, you would have experienced a larger increase in prices last month than someone, frankly, like me, who rarely eats out. I eat at home. That's one of the benefits of keeping kosher is there's not a lot of restaurants that I can eat at, and frankly they are expensive, and so I really don't eat out that often. Now let's see if I can get this. Let's see. Well, it doesn't want to go back, so let's do this. Is that going to take us back? Yeah, there we go. Okay, now let's go look at energy. Okay, so energy commodities actually went down by 2%. Now, energy commodities would be things like gasoline, okay? Whereas energy services went up by over 4%. So let's look at what energy services are. Okay, so electricity went up almost 5%, right? So, if you have an all electric home versus like my house, in my house, I have a gas range that only went up 1.5%, and but I have an electric oven that, so electricity went up 5%. So again, depending on what energy you use, that will change what you experience in terms of inflation. Okay, now let's look at major categories. Okay, so again, commodities went down by almost 2%, but services, aside from energy, went up almost 5%. Okay, so let's look at what are you talking about? Okay, shelter, housing went up over 5%. Medical care went up by over 3%. Transportation services almost 9%. Okay, so again, depending on how you used goods and services, your personal experience of inflation will be very, very different than, the national average of 2.9%. All right, now let's look at the state by state inflation. And here we go. CPI. Consumer. Okay, here we go. Consumer Price Index, Los Angeles. All right. So the consumer price, and in this case, I'm looking at Los Angeles. So if all you need to do for your area is Google Consumer Price Index, and then where you're at, Seattle, Omaha, Columbus, Ohio, whatever it is. Okay, so here in Los Angeles, okay, our overall inflation rate was higher. It was, looks like about 3.4%. Oh, here you go. Prices were up 3.4% from a year ago. Okay. And all items out except for food and energy went up, it looks like over 4%. Okay, so let's see, do they quote that here? Yeah. Okay, yeah, they don't quote that. So food prices went up 2.2%. Energy prices actually fell 3.8%, largely the result of a decrease in price of gasoline. Oh, here you go. The index for all items less food and energy went up 4.2%. So here in Los Angeles, the cost of living went up more than the country as a whole, which means we're experiencing higher inflation. Okay, so this is an important distinction because again, I'm not, I who live in Los Angeles, right? I'm not buying electricity from Columbus, Ohio, where my friend lives. I'm buying it here in LA. I'm not buying food from Miami, Florida, right? And so you can see if we come down here, okay, here's the overall inflation rate. So Los Angeles, well, it dropped from 3.9 to 3.2%. Now it's back up again for July. Okay, so, and we've been experiencing higher than the national average inflation for, basically the whole time. So you can see how things have been for us locally here in California, here in Los Angeles specifically. Okay, and by the way, it's not just Los Angeles; it's Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Anaheim. So that's typically what you'll see. Is there? It's hard to get down to like your precise neighborhood that you won't get, but you can at least get closer to where you're at outside of the national average. Okay, so again, in my location, I'm experiencing higher inflation than most, and that would match my personal experience as well. Okay, so next, let's look at here we go. Yeah. Okay. Let's look at current and real earnings. Okay. So this again, we're looking first at this nationally. So earnings went up by a penny an hour from $11.18 in June to $11.19 in July. Okay. That is a percent change of a tenth of a percent. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, average weekly earnings actually went down by 0.2%. Okay. But I mean, if you look at this overall, you see that for all intents and purposes, uh, um, earnings essentially stayed the same from last month. Okay. So if we look at average weekly earnings, $1,200.16. They went down slightly to $1,199.39. I mean, we're talking about a difference of what, 61, 71, 77 cents. I mean, we're really going to notice that, it went down by a tenth. For the most part, it basically stayed even. Okay. Now, year over year change. Okay. So 1 year change on an hourly basis, it went up 0.7%, so about a percent. Okay. And real average earnings went up 2.9%. Okay. So these are in constant dollars. Okay. So what that means is that they're based on they're adjusted for inflation. I'll just describe it that way. Okay, so earnings have gone up year over year. Okay, about 3%, which overall is a good thing. But most recently they've been pretty flat. That's nationally. Okay, now let's go back and let's look at, okay, now this is personal income now, state by state. Okay, and what you see here, let's see if I can make this bigger. There you go. Let's see, make sure. Yeah, okay, good. So what you're seeing here is oh, they still are okay. We've looked at these figures before. They still haven't updated them beyond the first quarter. So they still haven't done second quarter numbers. So I'm not going to go through this again because we talked about this last month. But you can just reviewing real quickly. The darker the color, the greater the percentage change in personal income. So people in the West here, in the Southwest, and in the Southeast in general did the best. People in the Midwest and the Northern Mountain states, did the worst in terms of personal income increases. Okay, and next we are going to look at dun, 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 civilian unemployment. Okay. All right. So, civilian unemployment, notice that it's trending up. So, in July, total unemployment was 4.3%. Okay. Versus June, where it was 4.1. And let's go to the beginning of the year. January, it was 3.7. Okay. And the lowest was around looks like it was about 3.4%. So it's gone up almost an entire percentage point since its low point back in April of last year. Okay, so it's gone up a little. It's gone up of 1% in a little over a year. This is the total. Now let's break it down. First of all, for men 20 years and older, okay, their unemployment rate is lower than the average, 4%. Okay, women 20 and older, their unemployment rate is 3.8%. Okay, why is the overall rate higher? It's because teenagers' employment rate is at 12.1%. That is down a little bit from June of 12.1%. It's still high, but it's typical for teenagers. The key thing is you see that it dropped in July. So as the summer I'm sorry, it's gone up. I take that back. So it's actually gone. In June, it was 12.1%, and in July, it went up to 12.4%. So maybe that's kids quitting their jobs, getting ready to go back to school. Okay, now looking at it demographically by race. Okay, so the unemployment rate for whites 3.8%. Okay, Black or African Americans, it's at 6.3%, which is on par with last month, but that's still up from May, but it's roughly on par with March. Okay, get rid of these two. Okay, Asians. Okay, their unemployment rate went down. They had bumped up to 4.1% last month, which was a big increase from May. That went up an entire point from May to June. Now it's gone back down a little bit to 3.7. Okay. And then finally for Hispanic or Latino, okay, the unemployment rate is 4.9%. That's slightly lower. Oh, wait, let's see, where's June? There we go. Okay, so 4.9 in June. Oh, July, sorry, is 5.3%. So it increased, fairly significantly from going from June to July. So this is looking at it on a national level. All right, now let's look at unemployment by state. Okay, it's difficult to get unemployment figures for for like a city like Los Angeles. Okay, but we can look at it by state, and this is continuing a trend. You're seeing South Dakota number one at 2%, Vermont, North Dakota, New Hampshire, Nebraska. Okay, these states and into the Southeast have the lowest unemployment rates. Okay, so 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 11, 12, 13. So 13 states, roughly a quarter of states have an unemployment rate below 3%. Okay, now let's look at the other end of the scale. Okay, the highest unemployment rate is the District of Columbia, which is interesting because as you'll see in a moment, the areas of employment that are expanding are primarily government connected. Okay, but the states with the highest unemployment rates: Nevada, Illinois, California, Washington, New Jersey, and then for some reason Kentucky is kind of an outlier here. It's a southeastern state, although it's kind of a northern southeastern state, or what we might call a border state. Okay, and then into Rhode Island, Ohio, and Alaska. So 50, 51, 49, 48, 47, 46, 45, 44, 43, 42, 41. Okay, so for states over 4%, it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So roughly a third of states have an unemployment rate over 4%, and they are kind of spread out over the country, but they are states that in general don't have particularly favorable business climates. That's why you see Illinois, California, Washington, New Jersey, Rhode Island. These are states that do not have robust business environments. Now, you might say, well, wait, Isn't Texas a great place to do business? Well, it is. That's true. A lot of people are moving to Texas, and so it could be because they get such a big influx of people that keeps their state unemployment rate high. But for the rest of these, New York, Michigan, even Ohio, these are states that don't have particularly good business climates, and so you can see how that affects unemployment. Now, on the other end, the other state that's known for having a particularly good business climate, Florida, is at 3.3%. Okay. And at 3.3%, so, that is significantly lower than the national average at 4.3%. Okay. So the national average falls in, right here where New York is. So indeed, most states are at or below the national average. But the states that are at the national average or above tend to have not particularly good business climates. All right. So you can see how policy, not just at the national level, but at the state level, really impacts your job prospects. Okay. Now, when I say, by the way, policies that aren't favorable, from a business standpoint, I'm generally am talking about the regulatory regime. I'm talking about fiscal policy, taxation, spending, but also, and it's not just on the state level; it can be on the local level as well. So, sales tax costs, property tax costs. And property taxes generally are levied at the county level. Some states like California, the rate is set at the state level, but counties have the ability to increase it through what are called special assessments. So all of these policies have an impact on the business climate for a state, especially the regulatory policies. Okay, so in the meeting I mentioned earlier, where I was there with colleagues from Texas and Atlanta, one of the fellows from Texas mentioned that that to to be, I'm what's called a professional fiduciary or an independent trustee. So there are states where how a trust is taxed is tied to where the trustee is domiciled, not where the trust or the beneficiaries are domiciled. Now, here in California, that's a competitive disadvantage for me because our taxes are so high. So somebody in Texas, for example, or somebody in South Dakota is unlikely to hire me to be their trustee because they'll go from South Dakota for sure has no income tax. They would go from not having an income tax to potentially having an income tax on income to the trust. Okay, and that's a huge expense here in California. It pretty quickly gets up to over 9%, right? And so it's the reality of living in California. But it puts people in my business in California at a competitive advantage. And the same is true of a number of business items that we deal with here in California. So, I'm not saying this to be political. It's just these are the facts of the situation. Now, you could argue it doesn't matter. That's a good thing or whatever. That's a discussion to have over bourbon. But let's at least acknowledge what the situation is, right? So that's what I mean when I talk about the business climate. Okay, so next, let's look at the civilian labor force participation rate. And here we go. Okay, so in May it was 62.5%. In June, 62.6%. In July, it went up to 62.7%. So a tenth of a percent higher, which means, and what that means is more people are entering the workforce. Okay, so when we talked about the civilian unemployment rate, going up from 4.1 to 4.3% in July. One of the reasons that's the case is more people have come into the workforce. Okay. So overall, that's a good thing. But you'll notice that even at 62.7%, we're still below where we were right before COVID hit. So February of 2020, the civilian work labor participation rate was 63.5%. We're still over a half a percent behind that. Okay. And going back 20 years, the labor participation rate was over 66%. Okay. So we are more than three. We're about 3.5% below that. Now, why is that important? Because the more people who are working, the more productivity we're generating in the country, and the more we increase our gross domestic product. All of these things are tied together. Okay, so this is the average for all people. Now let's look at the breakdown demographically. Okay, so the labor force participation rate by men 20 years and older, 70.5% this month, which is just slightly above June. Okay, that's for men, and for women, it went from 58.6 to 58.9. So there was a larger percentage increase by women over 20 entering the workforce. And then let's add to that the teenage labor force participation rate. Okay, it went down to 36.4% from 37.4%. So it went down a whole percentage point. Again, we saw that unemployment among teenagers went up. And so why would unemployment, excuse me, go up at the same time the labor force participation rate went down? What that means is the number of jobs for teenagers has dropped more than the number of teenagers who have given up looking for work, or who have stopped looking for work because they're going back to school. Okay, that's essentially what that means. All right, so let's look. Let's look by. Okay, well, what do I got? I got to get rid of this one. Okay, now let's look by race. Okay, so the white labor force participation rate, 62.3%. That's up slightly from 62.2%. Okay, for blacks or African Americans, the labor force participation rate went up to 63.2% from 62.7%. So it went up half a percent. And you notice that the labor force participation rate for blacks is higher than it is for whites. Okay, and it has been that way for a couple of years. Okay, that's a good sign. Okay, for Asians, the labor force participation rate went from 65.9% in June to 65.7%. So it did go down a little bit. Not a big change, okay, but obviously much higher than it is for whites and blacks or African Americans. And finally, perennially, the top labor force participation rate is Hispanics or Latinos at 67.3%, which is down slightly from I think it was 67.5% last month. So, and this is typically how it stacks up, with Latinos having the highest rate. You can see that's the case historically. Asians typically having the second highest rate, and then blacks and whites kind of going back and forth. Okay, so again, this is looking at it from the national perspective. Now, let's look at the employment. Oh, okay. I don't have the labor force participation rate by state. Those figures just are not published and updated on a regular basis. So we're going to skip that. Now let's look at employment by industry. Okay. And okay, this is viewed from a national standpoint. Okay. Now, here, let's bring this down so you can see it. Okay. And as has typically been the case, okay, the two of the largest gains in employment have been in education and health, which is primarily driven by government spending, okay, and by government itself, okay? So there was a net change of 17,000 jobs in government, okay, for an increase of 0.1%. There was a net change of 57,000 jobs in private education and health services. That's an increase of 0.2%. Now, let's just look beyond these. You'll see this will break it down, so you can see that right now local and state governments are driving the increase in government employment increases. Okay, federal government was actually relatively small, 1,000 new jobs. Okay, let's go back to. They're going to give me a preview. Oh, nope. What happened here? Okay, there we go. This is back to the. Oh no, I want the 1 month. Oh, huh. It doesn't want to. No, that's weird. It doesn't want to let me go back. Let's see, click on bars, just scroll down. Why isn't it letting me go back? Let's see, employment by industry. Go. Nope. Employment by industry monthly. That's what we want. Go. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So, and then let's look at public education and health. Okay. So notice private educational services actually declined by 7,200 jobs. Healthcare went up by 55,000 jobs, and social assistance went up by 9,000 jobs. And that's what I mean by these changes are being driven by essentially government spending. Okay. Now let's look at where the private sector is seeing job growth, and that's in leisure and hospitality, construction, and transportation and warehousing. Okay, so construction saw 25,000 new jobs, transportation and warehousing 14,000, leisure and hospitality 23,000. Okay, so if you're in construction, times are good. Okay, and you can see all sectors of construction went up, but the biggest increase was by specialty trade contractors. Let's look at what they mean by this. Oh, okay. They just broke it down by residential and non-residential. Did they break this down farther? Nope, they don't. Okay. So, but you can see that these specialty trade contractors, plumbers, electricians, that sort of thing. Okay. Heavy and civil engineering, construction, almost 3,000 jobs, construction of buildings, 3,700 new jobs. Okay. So pretty robust hiring in construction. Okay. And then in leisure and hospitality, so accommodation and food services went up by 25,600 jobs, but arts, entertainment, and recreation actually declined by 3,000 jobs, right? So leisure and hospitality, the two sectors are going in different directions. Let's look at these more directly. So performing arts, spectator sports, that kind of stuff went down. Museums went up, but amusement parks, gambling went down the most. Okay, so these kind of activities, and this makes sense because people are tight for money, and so they're not doing these kind of recreational activities, including gambling. Okay, this is going to take us back. Great. Okay, so then let's look at accommodation and food services. So both of those went up. Okay. So when people have leisure dollars, they're spending it on food and travel as opposed to amusement parks, gambling, that kind of thing. Okay, and last, transportation and warehousing. So it's kind of a mixed bag. You can see several sectors went down, several went up, several were essentially unchanged. You know, they lost 200 jobs, they gained, 0 jobs. Here they gained 300 jobs. Here they gained 500 jobs, you can see. So air transportation lost 1,200. Transit and ground transportation, almost 11,000. Truck transportation went down 2,500. So where are they increasing? In warehousing and storage, almost 11,000 new jobs. Couriers and messengers, almost 11,000. Support activities for transportation, over 6,000 new jobs. And okay, so it doesn't go into more detail on that, unfortunately, but you can see that transit and ground passenger transportation went down. Okay, and truck transportation also went down. Not a good sign for the economy, because it means that less goods are being transported. Okay, you can see scenic and sightseeing went up slightly. Rail transportation went down slightly. So even though people are spending more money on accommodations and food, it looks like what they're doing is they're doing what so-called staycations, where they stay. Well, actually, here, let's look at this. See, they're doing staycations, or they're just they're spending more money on eating out, and that's kind of their recreational activity. Okay, yeah. Oh, okay, we're good now. Let's look at a couple of that have lost employment significantly. So the information sector has lost employment quite a bit. Look at this. Motion pictures lost 3,500. Publishing, almost 6,000. Broadcasting, 1,600s. Telecommunications, 4. Computing infrastructure and data processing, 2,600. And information, 2,500. So all sectors of information have declined in employment last month. If you're in that sector, that's something to consider. Why is that happening? Okay, and what are you going to do about it? Okay, now we'll look at the 1-year figures in just a moment. Okay, that was the real big loser. The other is in financial activities. So finance and insurance, big drop. Okay, people don't have a lot of spare income, so their activities in investing and buying insurance have declined. And real estate and rental and leasing also dropped by almost 1,000 jobs. Again, people are doing less investing. They just don't have the additional income to do that, and so that's why we're seeing declines in those sectors in those industries. Now, let's compare this chart, which is the 1-month view for July, with the 12-month view. Okay, and you can see fairly consistent. Okay, the government sectors basically have added 1.5 million jobs. Okay, and construction has added about 240,000 jobs over the last year, August of last year through July of this year. Okay, those are the big winners in the government sector. The big winners in the government sector, and in the private sector, construction and leisure and hospitality, where there's about 300,000 new jobs. Okay, the rest hasn't been a whole lot. And for the year, information services jobs declined, although business and professional and business services actually year over year did increase, which is good. Okay, so that's what we're seeing on the national picture. Next, the national picture, but also by sector, which is important for us, depending on what kind of work we do. Okay, industry employment by state. Okay, so here is the states with the largest workforces. Shouldn't be much of a surprise. They're the states with the largest populations. Okay, so total non-farm employment in California, over 18 million. In Texas, over 14. In Florida, almost 10 million. North Carolina, 5. Illinois, 6. Ohio, 5.6, etc. Okay, now let's look at various sectors. So we'll look at education and health services first. Okay, so again, pretty robust in generally speaking in the same states. Okay, and in terms of government, again, the map doesn't change too much. So the largest states also tend to have the largest government employment. Okay, and it's interestingly enough, well, it really goes by the size of the state. Okay, now looking at areas that had the largest increases in private sector employment, so construction, okay, pretty much follows the national average. And again, the same is true for leisure and hospitality. So, on a state level, industry employment tends to follow the national picture. So what we were doing a few minutes ago and looking at sectors and where they were growing and by how much, that's pretty much playing out across state by state as well. Okay, so not a lot of new individualized information for us to pick up there. All right, now let's look at job openings. Okay, this is going to be this is going to be the last factor that we look at. Okay, and first of all, we're going to look at it on the national level. Okay, so these are job openings, and you'll see down here. You see regional. We're going to look at the state level, so I'm not going to really focus on that. But where are there the most job openings? Well, there's been an increase in government job openings overall of 0.2%. Okay, so the reason it's almost zero is federal job openings have declined by almost 2%, while state and local government job openings have increased by over 2%, by 2.1%, hence a net 0.2%. Okay. In terms of public education and health services, okay, overall, those have decreased by -3%. But notice, let's see. Here we go, health and social. Okay, so overall, job openings have decreased by 0.3% in healthcare and social services. So that going from May to June, there's a drop. Now that can be a good thing, because these represent costs in terms of tax outlays. So if the job openings are shrinking, that means there's less of a chance overall that these kinds of positions that require taxpayer funding are increasing. Okay, now for construction the went down almost 1% from May to June, 0.8%. So even though there was a big job increase from going from June to July, you can see job openings declined. What that would tend to mean is that as we go forward, we're likely to see less of an increase in that sector. Okay, and then the other one that saw a big increase was trade, transportation, utilities. Okay, that went up by 0.5%. Okay, primarily in wholesale trade. Wholesale trade and transportation. Okay, so here's transportation, warehousing, and utilities went up 0.7%. That's really where the big numbers are. Okay, now the opposite is information. Job openings dropped by 0.7%. So that's good, because since there were such large job losses, the fact that openings are going down means that market should stabilize. Okay. And let's see, what was the other one? Leisure and hospitality. Okay, saw a 0.5% increase in job openings. That was due exclusively to growth in accommodation and food services, because the change in arts and entertainment and recreation actually went down by 0.6%. Okay, so you can see how job openings are trending. Now, unfortunately, job openings are reported a month later than than employment change by industry sector. So we have to kind of triangulate a little bit. But in general, I mean, first of all, in a generally good economy, right, there's increasing job openings and job opportunities. So what we see here is overall job openings were unchanged from May to June, and we're up only slightly from April. Okay, so that would tend to show that the economy, the economy is slowing down. Employers are not, overall, they are not looking to hire, um, you know, ever more people. Okay, it's only when we get down into the numbers, though, that we see, which industries or which sectors, which industries are, seeing increases versus decreases. Okay, and this is a good number here to see. Federal government jobs declining almost 2% is a good thing, going forward. Okay, so then let's look at this now on a state by state basis. This is going to be the last chart we look at, state openings. Okay, so job openings, state by state. Now, so Montana has the most, or among the most, 6.1% in Montana. Colorado 5.9, New Mexico 5.7, Arizona 5.7, Alaska 7.2. I think Alaska gets the crown, right? Arkansas 5.7, Kentucky 6.7, 6.3 for West Virginia, South Carolina 5.9. So they have the largest number of jobs. Okay, Texas, which is a growing state, is just kind of, well, it's kind of in the middle, 5.3%. Florida, 4.7%. It's on the lower end. Okay, as is, North Carolina's at 4.3%. North Dakota, which you recall had the lowest unemployment rate, has kind of in the mid-range of job openings, 5.1. And South Dakota also 5.1. The states with the lowest job openings are here in the Midwest, 4.2, 4.4, 4.6, 4.1, 4.4, 4.1, but also California 3.6 and Nevada 4.5. Now, what does this all mean? Well, presumably the states with the highest number of job openings, one of two things is going on, right? Either they have workforce shortages, okay, or they have growing economies. Okay, so Alaska, I don't know specifically. This would be something for you to look at if you live in Alaska. Okay, they have the highest at 7.2. Either Alaska is really growing, and which I'm, aside from the oil and gas industry in Alaska, I don't know what else would really be growing there, or they just don't have enough workers, which is probably the case there. In Montana, on the flip side, is their economy is probably growing, and so that's why you're seeing such a high percentage of job openings there. Okay, and okay, so then let's just look at now California. Okay, yeah, that doesn't, unfortunately, won't give us more detail. But California with 3.6% job openings. So, again, that California, the economy is not doing particularly well here. And so you just don't have a lot of job openings because employers are not staffing up. Okay. And in a place like West Virginia, 6.3%, that's probably due to a mismatch between the jobs that are open and the skills and experience that the workforce has. That's another issue there. So as you look at these, we have to think about, why do particular states have different levels of percentage job openings? Okay, and that's something to think about as you consider. Oh gosh, I'm sorry, I forgot to turn this on. That was bad on me. Okay, so go through this again real quickly so you can see The states with the highest percentage of job openings are in the dark green. In the lowest, they're in the light green. Okay. And I was just talking about West Virginia. There's a mismatch there between, I think, between the skills and experience that the workforce has and the jobs that are open versus a state like California, where the business climate is not particularly good, and so there's not a lot of employers are not staffing up. Okay, so it's different factors like that that impact the local job force picture. So what does all of this mean for you as you look at the, now we spent 50 minutes going through those various charts, but you won't have to do that because you can target in on your specific situation. So you can do it in a half or a third of the time that I just took. So the question is, once you get the various data points, what do you do with it? And you do just what I was doing a minute ago. You figure out, why are the data points what they are? So I'm going to take West Virginia just because that's kind of top of mind. In West Virginia, where there's 6.3% job openings, right? Why is it so high? So I mentioned there's a mismatch between potentially a mismatch between the jobs that are available versus the skill set that people have. If that's the case, and you live in West Virginia, so then that would be an indication that maybe you need to look into getting some additional job training, or seeing how you can repurpose your skills into a different industry. So I'll give you the most vivid example of this, because I was talking to a fellow last week who is in the Marine, or was in the Marine Corps, and now he's in the civilian workplace. And he was saying how, he was a Marine Corps guy, he was an infantryman, and so, the skills he got out of the Marine Corps weren't really appropriate to the civilian job market, because, most employers don't need guys who know how to shoot a rifle, right? And this is a really common perspective for people who are transitioning industries, in this case, military to civilian. And I pointed out to him that the leadership skills, the people skills, the organizational skills, all of those that he learned in the Marine Corps are extremely valuable for a lot of different employers. So it wasn't so much that he needed job training, it's he needed to be able to reconceptualize his skills, his abilities, his experience, his knowledge, so that he could open up his aperture in terms of what industries might be available to him to look for a job. Okay, I had another conversation earlier this week with a fellow who's a sailor. He was an information specialist. It's basically, he's in intel. That's what he does. And his view of what he could do was fairly narrow. And so one of the things we talked about was, how could he widen the scope by understanding how he could use his knowledge, skills, and experience differently than how he had used them in the military, where he's doing, primarily threat assessment and that sort of thing. One of the things I mentioned to him was, there's a lot of intelligence gathering in the business world, in among financial companies and that kind of thing. So they're not literally looking into threats like physical threats, but they're looking at so-called economic threats. So what could happen that could change the price of commodities and those kind of things. And so that that would open up opportunity to him to repurpose his skills into an area where there might be not necessarily more opportunity, but an opportunity that's more interesting to him and would give him greater longevity in his civilian career. So these are all on the employment side, those are the kind of things I would encourage you to think about. On the pricing side, consumer price index, right? So how our individual purchases are really what drive whether we're experiencing inflation or not. So as you look at the various inflation figures, right, drill down into them and think about, what do I buy, right? Are you a foodie like me? And so, food looms larger in your budget than other things. Or are you really into entertainment and movies and that kind of stuff, right? So as you look at your personal finances and where you spend your money, how you're impacted by inflation is going to be different. Okay, and that's important for you to understand, especially because look, there's all kinds of people out there. We're in an election season, and you should be experiencing this way or that way or that way. It doesn't matter what you should be doing. What matters is what is happening. And the only way to really know that is to look at it ourselves and get an understanding of it. And that way we can talk about these issues intelligently with our family members, with our spouses, with our roommates, whatever it is. So that's why I encourage you. That's why I call it economic echoes, because the whole national and international economy interacts, and we get this sort of macro picture. But the echoes of that macro picture bounce off of us, and then the decisions that we make based on how they bounce off of us go back out at the micro level, go back out, and all together create the macro level. And so we need to know how the economy echoes on us, each of us as individuals. So a lot of information. I know I go through it really fast, and I'd really love to know what questions you have, what thoughts you have about this, so that I can tailor it better to what will be most meaningful for you. So if you have thoughts on that, please leave a comment in social media. All of those links will be in the show notes when this episode posts on LinkedIn. I'm sorry, on on YouTube. And if you've got other metrics that are of interest to you that maybe I'm not including, I'm happy to take a look at doing that. So really want to shape this up to make it as meaningful and for you as possible. So again, thank you very much for watching. That wraps up our shows for this week. So next week, starting on Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, is Trust and Estates Weekly. And here, I'll let you know what's happening if I can. My computer is going to cooperate. Okay, so so we're going to be talking on Monday about real estate change of ownership. Okay, on Tuesday at 10 a.m. is business lessons from the military, and we'll talk about having a well-defined mission. And then on Wednesday, a week from today, my guest is Jason Gerardo, and Jason is going to talk about being on the path to purpose. So Jason is a fellow military veteran, and he works with people to help his clients understand how knowing what your purpose is drives all the other decisions in your life, and will give you a much greater feeling of success because you're able to understand what success means to you. So this is something I've talked about from time to time. I'm really excited to have Jason on so we can have a conversation about that. Oh, and then next week on Thursday at 5 p.m. is the next episode of Jiggers' Place. By the way, that's 5 p.m. Pacific time. Okay, that's our sort of our time to kind of get together toward the end of the week and just relax over a cocktail and talk about all the things not related to business and professions. And I'm going to be talking about kindness versus niceness. And I think those are two very highly misunderstood concepts, and it's important for us to understand the difference. So I invite you to sit back, join me for a cocktail next week on Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific time. So thank you so much for joining me today. Wishing you not just a wonderful rest of the day, but a wonderful rest of the week. And signing off as I always do, Marie, darling, you are my bell.